Scientists who have studied the Apalachicola River for decades have shown that it is inherently resistant to dredging because of the nature of the low gradient coastal plain through which it runs. Had the Army Corps thoroughly done its homework, it would have known that too and left the Apalachicola alone. Instead, the Corps stubbornly tried opening the Apalachicola for 44 years, but was never able to maintain a 9 by 100-foot year-round channel, in spite of nearly continuous dredging. As a result of that fruitless effort, the Corps produced more than 34 million cubic yards of sand, what they call dredge spoil. The abysmal economics of the Apalachicola Navigation Project, among the worst in Corps history, made the Corps unwilling to incur the expense of hauling its spoil away. So, with devastating disregard for the consequences, the Corps piled most of its spoil on the banks of the Apalachicola. Here is one large example of such a dredged spoil mound. Local residents call it Sand Mountain, and it still stands nearly 65 feet tall, more than 20 years after the last dredging, and it is still very actively eroding. The Corps placed more than 150 dredged spoil mounds along the river. Ordinarily, woody vegetation and trees along banks and point bars would have helped stabilize at least some of that loose sand. But the Corps de-snagged the river, removing that natural stabilizing structure from much of the river's shoreline. That turned the entire river into a giant sand conveyor belt. The effects of all that sand were profound. Endangered species of freshwater mussels nearly died out due to sediment. Game fish populations were reduced by as much as 75% where sand displaced their natural spawning areas. Foremost among the sand damage, though, was the disconnection between river and floodplain caused by sand dams which formed as dredged sediment entered sloughs and creeks and then dropped to the bottom. Here you see a sand dam completely filling the entrance to Douglas Slough, blocking any low-stage water flow from the river into the floodplain. Many of the waterways connecting river and floodplain met the same fate. Why does that matter? Here is the Apalachicola as seen from above, but peer beneath the tree canopy and you see a wonderland of water. The Apalachicola main channel is 107 miles long, but all the sloughs, creeks, and floodplain channels add another 409 miles to the Apalachicola. Cut off the connections between the main river channel and its floodplain, and you strangle 4/5 of the system. The floodplain, shown here in a high water stage to illustrate its full scope, reaches far beyond the river's banks. It nourishes not just the river itself, but the entire region. It greatly expands the routes by which water can reach Apalachicola Bay. It nourishes the tupelo trees, whose blossoms are critical to the local honey industry. It provides spawning grounds for a host of river and marine species, and it nourishes Apalachicola Bay and the Gulf with essential nutrients. The Florida Department of Environmental Protection accumulated extensive evidence of the damage done by eroding coarse spoil. That's why, in its last round of permits, FDEP actually ordered the Corps to open up 20 of the sloughs its spoil had dammed. But the Corps failed to do that. It was that unwillingness or inability that ultimately persuaded FDEP to deny the Corps further permits for dredging in 2005. And nothing has changed in the more than 20 years since then. The Corps has taken no steps to remove spoil mounds along the river, to replant point bars to help prevent further erosion, or to remove dams blocking sloughs and creeks connecting river and floodplain. It's not that those actions are impossible. Nonprofits such as Apalachicola Riverkeeper and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation are pursuing such remedies. They have been forced to do that because the Corps refused to take responsibility. 20 years of inaction by the Corps completely disqualifies them to undertake further navigation activities on the river. The stakes for the Apalachicola River and Bay and for the ecosystems and communities that depend on them couldn't be higher. The Corps has demonstrated that they cannot be trusted to act in the best interests of these river, bay, and marine systems, so we should not trust them again, ever.